Today, we're going to continue detailing the lore of the Undercity, from the Draenor era onwards. What secrets lurk in the shadows? What treachery awaits the Forsaken? Will the city be able to survive what's to come? Let's find out. Draenor. As the chaos of the world outside continued to grow, the Corcron guards, the elite warriors of the Horde, had quietly withdrawn from their posts. The shift in leadership and the unrelenting pressure of the times had prompted them to leave, each soldier vanishing into the shadows, with their loyalty to the war chief now cast in doubt. The stronghold, once buzzing with the discipline and presence of these renowned guards, felt eerily silent. The tension in the air was palpable, as though even the very walls of the fortress could feel the absence of such an imposing force. Now standing as the last protector of this forsaken stronghold, Bragor, once a mere soldier, now carried the heavy title of Hand of War Chief. His new role had come with little fanfare, yet it was a responsibility he could not ignore. The weight of the Horde's future, of its fractured leadership, rested on his shoulders, a burden that sat heavily on his brow. His gaze, cold and unflinching, scanned the room where he stood, silent but alert, feeling the loss of the Corcron as if their departure had left a gaping hole in the very fabric of their defenses. But what caught Bragor's attention on this fateful day was something far stranger than the absence of soldiers. In the far corner of the dimly lit chamber, there, suspended in an iron cage, lay the body of Overseer Kragosh, the once feared overseer of the Horde's internal affairs, a figure known for his brutal and unforgiving methods, now found himself a prisoner, his massive frame slumped lifelessly within the rusted bars. Bragor approached slowly, wary of the strange sight before him. The cage had no apparent reason for being there, nor did Kragosh's presence make any sense in this moment of turmoil. Kragosh had been a man of power, influential and deeply embedded in the inner workings of the Horde. He was not one to be captured easily, yet here he was, his body oddly still, his expression one of bewilderment, as though death had come for him under some mysterious unseen hand. His once ferocious features now appeared almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the fearsome figure he had been in life. The air around the cage felt unnaturally cold, and the faintest of whispers seemed to echo from the walls, as though the very building itself was trying to tell Bragor something. A strange sense of dread twisted in his gut, and he reached out a gloved hand to touch the cage, testing its sturdiness. But before he could do so, a shadow moved in the corner of his eye. Something was stirring in the dark corners of the room. It wasn't just the body of Kragosh that demanded his attention, but the mystery of how and why this grisly scene had come to pass. Why would Kragosh, of all people, end up in such a state? What strange force had taken him down, and who had placed him in this cage? Had it been one of the Horde's enemies? Or is there something more insidious at play? Bragor's hand tightened on the hilt of his weapon. The answers he sought were slipping further from his grasp, and whatever twisted fate had delivered this outcome to Kragosh soon might be knocking on his own door. Legion. During the Legion's third invasion, the skies above Azeroth were torn asunder with unrelenting fire, and the surface world was thrown into chaos. But beneath the surface, within the labyrinth depths of the Undercity, a quieter, more insidious war was waged. The Apothecarium, a place of twisted alchemy and unholy experimentation, was already a site of corruption and foul magic, a breeding ground for horrors both physical and psychological. It was here that the Apothecarian's most prized and deadly creations were born, potions that would ensure the Forsaken's survival, or, at times, their doom. The same place that had once seen the birth of the Forsaken now stood poised to aid in their darkest hour. But it wasn't the Apothecarian's potions that had drawn attention this time. It was a prisoner, a captive, who had been held by the Forsaken for too long, one who was more than just a pawn in their deadly games. Called Tira Deathweaver, one of the highest ranking officers of the Ebon Blade, had been captured during an earlier skirmish. The Forsaken had long coveted his unique abilities and his knowledge of the Scourge. Trapped within the cold stone walls of the Apothecarium, Kultira had been subjected to unspeakable experiments, his spirit all but broken, as the Forsaken sought to twist him into something else entirely, another tool for their war. But the Ebon Blade, ever vigilant, would not allow one of their own to suffer in silence. Under the shadow of the Legion's advancing forces, and with their ranks thinning under the relentless pressure, the Ebon Blade's daring operation was set into motion. A small, elite group of Death Knights, led by the fierce and enigmatic Thessarian, made their way into the Undercity under the cover of the chaos brought by the Legion's third invasion. The city's defenses were weakened, distracted by the demonic onslaught, and this was their opportunity. Silent as shadows, and with unholy power coursing through their veins, the Ebon Blade infiltrated the Apothecarium. Their approach was swift and brutal. Death Knights wove through the labyrinth of alchemical vats and mutated horrors that the Forsaken had bred in their relentless pursuit of knowledge and power. They met little resistance. Many of the Forsaken had already turned their attention to the surface world, their eyes focused on the war at hand. In the depths of the Apothecarium, they found Kultira. His once proud frame was battered and broken, but his spirit remained unyielding. His eyes, however, were dimmed with exhaustion, the results of long hours of torment and the weight of his captivity. The Forsaken had sought to pry every secret from his mind, knowing his knowledge of the Scourge and his experience in the Death Knight ranks would be invaluable. The Thessarian moved quickly to Kultira's side, his blade already drawn in case of any Forsaken who still might lurk in the shadows. But none came. The Apothecarium was abandoned, its grotesque experiments paused in the face of the Legion's invasion.
"You're not alone, Kultira,"
The Thessarian muttered under his breath, his voice a low growl that only his fellow Death Knight could hear. His words carried weight, a promise made in the heat of battle, one that would not be broken. With swift precision, the Ebon Blade broke the chains that had bound Kultira. The runes, etched into the manacles, flickered out as the Death Knight severed their grip. The prison that had held him for so long was no more. Kultira staggered to his feet, still weakened, but the fire in his eyes had been reignited.
"Thessarian, you found me,"
Kultira rasped, his voice hoarse but filled with gratitude.
"Never abandon one of our own."
The Thessarian replied firmly, his tone carrying the weight of a bond forged in the icy depths of death itself.
"We'll get you out of here."
But as they moved to leave, the sound of clattering footsteps reached their ears. The Apothecarium wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. A small squad of Forsaken had returned, likely drawn by the disturbances caused by the Ebon Blade's infiltration. Their eyes glinted with malice, and they drew weapons with a sickening confidence, ready to defend the lab and their twisted creations. The Death Knights did not hesitate. The Thessarian's rune blade lashed out in a blur of unholy fury, cut into the Forsaken ranks with ease. The Apothecarium's air grew thick with the stench of death, as Kultira, his strength returning with each passing second, took up arms beside them. His connection to the Death Knight power flowed freely once more, his rune blade slicing through the air with practiced ease. Together, the Ebon Blade cut a path through the Forsaken, clearing the way for their escape. They moved as one, death and shadow incarnate, each strike a promise to the Horde's enemies that they would not be defeated, no matter the cost. As they emerged from the depths of the Apothecarium, Kultira, now free, looked at the Thessarian with a renewed sense of purpose. They had been sent out to rescue him, but in truth, it was he who had rescued them all. The Ebon Blade had once again proven that there was no force, be it Forsaken, Legion, or even death itself, that could keep them apart. They were unyielding, relentless, and now, with Kultira by their side once more, their power was complete. The Legion's third invasion might have torn Azeroth apart, but the Ebon Blade and the will of Kultira would ensure that their enemies would be left to feel the cold grip of death at every turn. Before the storm. After the grueling and harrowing Argus campaign, the Forsaken were left to rebuild and regroup, their lands and forces battered but not broken. The Legion's third invasion had claimed countless lives, Forsaken among them, and Sylvanas Windrunner, the chief and leader of the Forsaken, had not returned to Lordaeron in the wake of the campaign. Her absence created a leadership vacuum in the Undercity, one that, for the time being, fell into the hands of the Desolate Council, a group of high-ranking Forsaken who had long served as advisors and leaders in Sylvanas' stead. Each member of the council represented a different faction within the Forsaken, all bound by loyalty to the cause, but with their own ideologies and goals. While the council had never been a cohesive force, their rule became necessary in the absence of the war chief, as the Forsaken were left to navigate the uncertain political landscape following the defeat of the Burning Legion. The Desolate Council had been tasked with maintaining order and guiding the Forsaken through a period of mourning and reflection, but also through the rebuilding of their ranks and their city. The Undercity, though once a symbol of death and decay, became the heart of their recovery, a place of renewal as much as it was a place of sorrow. In the dim and winding halls of the Undercity, a large, somber event was being prepared, a remembrance ceremony. This was not just a tribute to those who had died during the Third Legion invasion, but a chance for the Forsaken to reflect on their struggles, their sacrifices, and the pain they had endured. The Forsaken had always been marked by the shadow of death, but it was in moments like this that they came together, their eerie silence filled with the weight of shared loss. The Desolate Council oversaw every detail, and while their intentions were noble, the ceremony was tinged with complexity. The council's members, composed of individuals with varying backgrounds and motives, had differing views on how to honor the dead. There was no single, unified approach to the memorial, but the general atmosphere was one of grim reverence. The Grand Hall of the Undercity, the once flourishing apothecarium, was now transformed into a place of solemn ceremony. Darkened banners hung from the walls, their fabric embroidered with the sigils of the Forsaken. The scent of burning incense, heavily laced with herbs meant to ward off the scent of decay, lingered in the air. The light from the dimly flickering torches cast long shadows, and the haunting sound of distant moans echoed through the tunnels. The Undercity itself mourned its fallen. The ceremony began with a cold, respectful silence as the members of the Desolate Council gathered at the front. At their lead was High Executive Terranel, a cold and calculating leader who had taken charge in Sylvanas' absence. His expression was impassive, his usual ruthlessness tempered by the weight of the moment. He began with a simple, direct address to the assembled Forsaken who had gathered to honor their fallen.
Brothers and sisters, we stand united in the wake of the Legion's assault, bound by blood and shared pain of our losses. Our enemies sought to tear us apart, but we remain, undying and resolute. We remember those we have lost, and in their name we shall continue the fight. Their sacrifices will not be forgotten. May they find peace in the afterlife, though we, who have no such luxury, shall carry their legacy forward.
As Terranel spoke, members of the crowd, a mixture of soldiers, workers, and leaders, nodded solemnly. They understood the harsh truth. Their immortality was a curse as much as it was a blessing, and those who fell in battle did not have the luxury of resting peacefully. Their bodies, their spirits, would never know true rest, but their names would live on in the Undercity's haunted halls. One by one, the members of the Desolate Council took their turn to speak. Lady Sylvis, the ruthless head of the apothecarium, briefly acknowledged the sacrifices of the Forsaken, her voice cold and emotionless, though a rare flicker of something resembling respect passed across her otherwise stern features. Lord Aranis, a high-ranking military strategist, spoke of the bravery displayed in the defense of the city, emphasizing the strength of the Forsaken soldiers who had fallen in the name of survival and loyalty. His speech was one of resolve, one that sought to rally the Forsaken to continue the war against their enemies, and to never forget the cost of victory. After the speeches, the ceremony moved to its most somber moment, the reading of names. In front of the gathered crowd, a large stone altar stood, adorned with the symbols of the Forsaken. The names of the fallen, each one etched in the cold stone, was read aloud by Overseer Valandra, a figure known for her unwavering devotion to Sylvanas. She stood in silence, her voice carrying through the dim chamber as she called the names of the dead, each one followed by a short, reverent pause. For every Forsaken who had fought and died, their name would be remembered. The faces of the crowd grew somber as each name was spoken, and even the most hardened warriors allowed themselves a brief moment of grief. They had fought together, lived together, and in the end, they had bled together. The bonds forged in the fires of war ran deep, and in this space of silence, the Undercity, once a city of decay, felt like a fragile sanctuary for those who had remained. At the end of the ceremony, Bragor, the newly appointed Hand of War Chief, took to the stage, a rare moment of presence from the one who held the title in Sylvanas' absence. He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the gathering masses of Forsaken, before speaking quietly, his voice filled with the weight of the office he held. In his speech, Bragor told the audience that the war is not over, and neither is their will to live, that they fight for those they have lost, and they fight to honor their memory. Bragor took a moment, closing his eyes briefly in respect to the dead. He stated that together they will rebuild, and together they will make the Horde and their people strong once more. With that, the ceremony came to a close. The Forsaken in attendance left quietly, their faces grim but determined. The dead had been honored, but the living had work to do. The city of the Forsaken, abandoned by its war chief, would survive, for its people had learned long ago that survival was more than just a choice. It was their way of life. The Desolate Council had taken up the mantle of leadership, and with the ashes of the past behind them, they would rebuild the future in Sylvanas' absence. The Undercity, now a graveyard for the past, would become the heart of a new, unyielding, Forsaken nation. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Content comes out regularly with lore videos on Sunday, and World of Warcraft Protection Paladin content coming soon on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays.